Welcome, everybody, to the Rytown Park Commission meeting of August 27th, 2019. Please rise and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Debbie, please call the roll. We have Julie Souza, Rytown Councilwoman, City of Rye Councilwoman, sitting in for Mayor Cohn tonight.
Acting Commissioner Souza.
Present.
Commissioner Hurd.
Yes.
Commissioner Rosenberg.
Yes.
Commissioner Falenka.
Yes.
Commissioner Salanitro.
Here.
President Zuckerman.
Here. May I have a motion to go into executive session to discuss contractual matters and possible litigation?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We are now in executive session. We will be back hopefully shortly. All right. We are back in public session, and at this time, we're going to move to item 6.1, resolution authorizing the commission president to sign a contract for the reconstruction of the Dearborn Avenue seawall. And the contract will be awarded to MTS Infrastructure LLC. There were 4 bids received for the project. MTS is the low bidder, and the bid is in round numbers, $1.35 million. This will be reimbursed 90% by FEMA and is a result, of course, as we have been talking about for a number of years now, the destruction caused by Hurricane Sandy in 2012. May I have a motion and a second, please?
So move.
Second.
Debbie, please call the roll.
Yes.
Commissioner Hurd.
Yes.
Commissioner Rosenberg.
Yes.
Commissioner Falenka.
Yes.
Commissioner Salanitro.
Yes.
President Zuckerman.
Yes, and at this time, I'd like to announce that this meeting must end at 6:45. It is now 6:15. So that that's because the Village of Rybrook Board of Trustees has a meeting immediately following and must start on time. And so we will be moving through as rapidly as possible, I should say efficiently as possible. The next item is Rytown Park Commission minutes. If we can approve any of these minutes without change, I would like to do so. There are the minutes of 18 June, 16 July, and 23 July.
I can approve 16 and 18.
16 and 18?
Oh.
Okay, then we will hold over the 23 July. May I have a motion to approve the Rytown Park Commission meetings of June 18th and July 16th, please?
Make a motion.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, and we will,
Who made the second? I didn't hear.
Paul did. The next item is our management report, and I think that includes Elon, is that correct? Do you have anything to add? The management report is set forth. I'm not going to read it. Before Elon goes on, I just wanted to highlight a couple of things. That, number one, the organization Save the Sound released results of its Long Island Sound Beach report, and Rytown Park's beach was ranked #1 in New York. And secondly, there was a very nice article in the Westmore News about 2 weeks ago. Is that right? 2 weeks ago? 3 weeks ago? A big 2-page spread, which I urge everybody to read if they get a chance. Very nicely done. Okay. Elon?
Elon, before you start, I just want to point out that in your online published agenda, not in your paper agendas, there is a financial statement that was recently added as we were on our way over here. A financial statement through July 31st for your review.
I didn't have it on my Elon unless it was,
If you've updated recently, because I think it was
I just tried to.
published.
All right.
I don't know what time.
Elon, I think you have a parking report for us? Or
Yes.
something? Yes?
Hopefully something, yes. And I'll try and move through as quickly as possible. So, thank you very much. This is a revenue analysis of the 2019 Rytown Park and Beach season up until July 31st. I haven't had a chance to review the financial statement that was just released, but I will after this presentation to make sure that it's the numbers that are here are accurately reflective of what's in the financial statement. So just to quickly go over tonight's presentation, there's going to be a series of statistics and graphs of total activity level, permits, revenues, and a little bit of revenue forecasts. And the primary measures for these are residents versus non-residents and prior year comparisons. Some of the factors to consider for these statistics include new technology. We've had a big push in technology going into this season. Obviously the fee adjustments that were passed by the commission earlier this year. Weather, which I'll go into it a little bit, and data availability and comparisons. There were some issues with getting the original data from some of the prior years. I was relying mostly on summaries up until July 31st in past years. You may notice that going forward into this presentation that some years are missing, but we hope to have a fuller picture for you in the future. And also with the new technology, there's a lot more of a chance to actually get more accurate data for this year. So the fee adjustment assumptions going into this year when there were the changes, the assumptions included buildup of followership, a sense of membership and community for permit holders, and it was also to account for the opportunity risk for the park in terms of weather, in terms of attendance. There was also the assumption that it would be easier entrances for permit holders. They no longer had to pay for a reduced parking fee when coming in. Instead, it was just they come in, check in, and then they can enter the park. Also, less cost burden on the residents compared to non-residents, and updating the fees to market values. On that last bullet point, I'll go over that in a second, but this is just a summary of the fee adjustments. As everyone sees when they go onto the website, they could see the increases between the last 3 years and this year. I've also included a break-even point where basically you would have to visit a certain amount of times this year in order to break even compared to prior years. It averages about 15 times depending on which permit you have, but for our residents it's either 10 times or 19 times for family residents permit holders, but it's obviously more for non-resident permit holders. The daily fees is also interesting to look at it for the increases. Using an example of all-day parking and beach for 2 visitors and 1 car, it's only a $3 increase for residents during the weekday, a $15 increase for residents on the weekend. Non-residents, it's a larger increase, $20 and $25 respectively. Going into that last bullet point from a couple slides ago, these are comparisons of other nearby parks when the parking improvement study, the parking committee from October, November of last year, 2018, came out with a study. They included this chart to compare the parking fees to other nearby parks. And you can see the blue on the bottom row is reflective of the current rates, and that goes hand in hand with some of the other parks. The yellow is reflective of what the rates were last year. So we're still in that range of some of the parks in the region. now going into more of the stats, the majority of the revenue share does come from non-resident purchases and transactions. This is primarily non-permit holders who come in and want to park or want to use the beach. That's what the 60% of transactions are on the left side. So the left pie chart is all transactions. So you have the non-residents at about 60%, resident about 23.4%. The unknown were transactions that were hard to tell whether or not it was a resident or non-resident based on the quality of the data. And then there's another column for those that we were able to identify as permits. The right side is a breakdown of the resident portion of the pie chart, and you can see those that I was able to identify based on the transactions. Rye Neck was about 1.4%, Rye City 4.5%, Rye Brook 1.6%, Portchester 3.1%. There's again a big other, the dark blue category, but it's approximately 50%, so you can assume that you can double all those rates for the specific resident locations. And this is the same measure, however, instead of number of transactions, this is actual revenue. So non-resident revenue was about 55%, resident revenue about 27.7%, 28%.
Just from what I'm looking at, Rye City seems to be the highest of all the groups, is that correct?
In ter-
10% versus, what, 8%?
Yes, in terms of the in terms of the dollars spent, exactly, the dollars spent, the revenue coming in, this is a combination of all permits sold, all parking fees, and all beach passes.
What is the other resident? Did you just say it was just hard to decipher?
So those are transactions that I was able to identify as a resident based on the fee that was paid, but I wasn't able to tell where they are originating from. So for example, beach passes that you purchase at the pay stations, you can indicate that you're a resident if it's tied to the parking fee that you put in and where you originally said that you were a resident. But on the actual transaction itself, you can't tie it back to that when you're looking at the data, so it's difficult to decipher where they're coming from. We just know that they are residents based on what they're paying.
Hey, Lone,
Yes?
this is for this year.
This is for this year up to July 31st.
Are there any records around that can make comparisons to last year?
I'm going to go a little bit into that. The data is a little bit scarce and it's harder to decipher and compare based to this year. But
It'll be interesting to see
definitely.
what those numbers were last year as compared to what you've come up with this year.
Fritz, the purpose of this is exactly that. We're trying to accumulate data to look last year, compare it with this year if we can. And I know. And then hopefully be able to use especially this year's data in the fall to start to determine what the rate should be for next year. I mean, obviously there was a lot of discussion and you were leading that in terms of dealing with resident rates. And so hopefully we'll be able to determine what is best for the park and for the residents going forward based on the data that we're accumulating.
Can we get once this presentation, can we get a hard copy?
Absolutely.
Okay, I'd like to have one, please.
So hopefully I'll be able to answer that specific question, Commissioner Falenka, in the next couple slides. So looking at resident versus non-resident permits, these aren't all permits. These are permits that are non-resident family, non-resident senior, non-resident single, and then the resident equivalents. On the left side, the bar charts, that's the total number of permits that have been sold up until July 31st. You can see the number hasn't moved significantly between the number of resident permits and the number of non-resident permits. It's still approximately 80% of permits are sold to residents, Approximately 20% are non-resident permits that are sold. Looking on the right side, the pie chart, that's the breakdown of the 2019 season resident versus non-resident permits specifically, and you can see in more detail. Most of our permits are resident senior permits. They're resident lifetime permits, which aren't necessarily revenue generators, but they are. But they are our commitment to our residents that have been here for a long time. In addition, the non-resident senior permits are a significant number for revenue and for transactions coming in, and also the resident family permits. This is also distribution of the resident versus non-resident permits. Over the last 3 years, including this year, the number has been relatively the same. There is a slight increase in the resident single permit that's on the bottom, as you can see above the purple. So that was reflected in the data. This goes more to what you were asking, Commissioner Falanca. Between 2017 and 2019, the proportion, the distribution of permits, this is all permits, hasn't changed significantly. Non-residents still purchase about 25% of the permits, and then going down the line are the different constituencies from the town of Rye. Rye Neck is about 11%. Rye-Brook has gone up about from 6 to 11%. The city of Rye has remained about the same, 30 to 33%. Portchester has gone down a little bit in its share from 29% to 21%. This chart shows the comparison from previous years up until July 31st of parking versus beach versus permit revenues. Specifically, what you should look at is 2017 versus 2019. Parking has gone down, however, permit has increased and taken that share. Parking has gone down approximately $63,000, but permit revenue has gone up about $84,000. This primarily, I would say that it's attributed to the fact that now you don't have to pay the reduced parking fee if you hold a permit. You can just show up, check in, and then you're good to go into the park.
So in other words, people are buying permits instead of parking on a daily basis.
Well, it's specifically for, that has some to do with it, but it's more of the fact that in previous years, if you held a permit, you would still have to come in and pay $4 if you were a resident for parking, or $5 if you were a non-resident for parking, which was a reduced rate. Now, all of that is built into the permit.
Right, right,
And a higher rate for the permit.
yeah.
Well, this is good because we can analyze this and make decisions for next year.
Just to wrap up the breakdown of those three categories, permit revenue up until, permit revenue from past years, usually it's unchanged going into August and September. So all of these bars are reflective of April to July. And obviously, as I mentioned before, the permits for this year, the revenue for the permits have been higher than ever before. Going into the next couple months in August and September, in parking, based on the moving average from previous years, it can be forecasted that the park will make approximately $330,000 in parking revenue specifically. Again, it will be lower because now parking is built in for the permit holders, but we're still expecting a little bit of a bump that August can bring in. And finally, beach revenues, the same thing. We're projecting approximately $450,000 in revenue by the end of September, by the end of the season. So, conclusions from this presentation, based on the assumptions that I laid out in the beginning of the presentation, when the fees were adjusted, it was to promote the sense of membership and community, and that's definitely reflected in an increase in resident permits since 2017. And we're also able to track lifetime permits now, so we're able to get from the data that more concrete figures about who is coming in, and especially who of our residents are able to come in. Accounting for opportunity risks for the park, there was actually heavier rainfall in July and August of this year than in past years, so that may have affected some of the revenue, some of the transactions. There's easier entrances for permit holders. Obviously, the eliminated reduced parking fee in exchange for no additional parking fee, and less cost burden on residents. As of now, we have, based on all of the revenue versus all the transactions, those two pie charts I showed in the beginning, residents are paying approximately $34.22 per transaction, non-residents $26.74 per transaction. Again, that's because you have about 75% of permits being sold to residents. So it's not that residents are paying higher, it's that there's a greater share coming from residents. And recommendations for future fees and budgets going into the development of next year's budget. The commission should remember to consider the reduced parking fee versus built-in parking fee. Affordability for customers, obviously, that's a big factor for making these financial decisions. Cost impacts on residents versus non-residents. And also, one thing that wasn't mentioned too much in this, but it will be important, is measuring the changes to the parking structure based on the Parking Solutions Committee recommendations that came in at the end of last year, beginning of this year.
Do you have a breakdown on the fines collected with the new parking system in place and the ticketing?
We're just beginning to get the data on that, and it's of all of the components of this system, the component that got on absolutely last is the enforcement. So we've had some enforcement, but very little data.
We've had a problem with the license plate reader reading the license plates in certain parts of the park. And actually, we have a meeting with Verizon set up to address that. So there's been a glitch in it, but tickets have recently been issued. And I don't think that there's a large volume of parking fines, but there have been some.
Because that would help in making further decisions
Yeah,
if we had that.
absolutely.
That's unfortunate.
Elon, I'm sorry to rush you, but thank you. I mean, this is really thorough, and I'm going to sure we're going to have some more questions.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and again, with the enforcement revenue and everything else, that'll go into the budget development.
Right.
That'll be going into next year.
Yeah.
And when will we get these hard copies? At least mine, anyway.
I can hand it to you tomorrow morning.
Thank you.
Quick enough?
Thank you.
Okay. Elon, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Terrific presentation. Let's just skip to number 6.5, a request from the Portchester Rybrook Wrighttown Chamber of Commerce to for a raffle prize. Debbie, just want to talk, I'm sure we're all going to agree to this.
For as long as I've been on this staff, the both chambers of commerce from Rye and also from Portchester Rye Brook have requested the donation of a family permit to Rydetown Park that they could auction off to raise money for the Chamber of Commerce. And this is their annual request.
I move on the request.
A second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. And before we get to the restaurant report, let's have public comment on non-agenda items. I know that there's a young woman here, I think. Did you want to speak? No? Or what'd you say?
Restaurant report.
Oh, okay. So, the restaurant report.
Hi, folks. Bobby Harris from Barley Beach House. Everything's going well over there. The crowds are still coming. We're working on a fall menu now to roll out right after the season.
You mean when it's freezing?
Yeah.
That comes about because of my conversation with Amy last night?
Oh, unaware of any
Oh, she-
conversation last night, no.
Okay, I was there last night. I mentioned it to her, and I asked her to speak to you about it. We're going to have to sit down and talk about how we're going to do that if you need it. She was unaware that you had that kind of a problem for the public. It's our understanding that the water pipes that run from the bathhouse to the restaurant are not very far below the surface and may freeze, which would impact the restaurant's ability to be open during the winter. So that's a discussion that we will have to have.
Okay. Also, we weren't able to get to the north gate this year as we had hoped. Just staffing issues and stuff, we just got sidetracked. I know in our lease it says if we don't operate it for a certain amount of time, we lose, access to it. We're hoping to have that little discussion.
Is that another discussion?
Yeah, well, I'd just like to bring it up, and we do hope to, we bought a nice piece of equipment that's gonna help us operate it next year. So we're hoping that we don't lose the right to operate it next
And
year.
what's the status with your beach operation?
Just waiting on the liquor license. The New York State Liquor Authority contacted us Friday, just asked for more pictures. We submitted those on Friday, and we're just waiting for their approval.
Okay.
To clarify, your North Gate operation, you have purchased a piece of equipment and it's your intention to open when?
Memorial Day.
Memorial Day.
I have it up and running on Memorial Day, yeah.
Is there other work to that facility that you're planning?
Just to make sure that the electric and plumbing is up to code, yeah, as far as the health department is concerned. But that'll all get done in the off-season, so we're ready to.
So plumbing and electrical upgrades are in the works for this winter?
Yeah.
All right.
Questions or?
Not right now.
Okay. Thanks.
Thanks, Bobby.
Thank you.
Thank you. And that completes our agenda. May I have a motion to adjourn?
So move.
All in favor?
Aye.
6:40.
Good job.
Well done, Gary.